Listen, we went from the White Lotus finale last Sunday to this past Sunday, the return of The Last of Us back for a second season. The world may be chaotic, but you know what? We'll always have Sunday nights on HBO. I'm thankful for that. The Last of Us is back. The group chat is here. Let's get into it. I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud, and this is Commotion. Okay, listen, when season 1 of The Last of Us came out, it was called the greatest video game adaptation of all time. Fans loved it, and then critics loved it, but it's been 2 years since that first season. And I'll tell you this, I was really missing the show, so I'm really relieved to have it back again.
This is where we live. And what's that?
The fence.
What's inside?
People.
What's outside?
Monsters.
Monsters. That is a bit of the trailer of The Last of Us Season 2. Outside the fence, there are zombies. They are monsters. There's lots of them, and they're evolving and maybe changing, and that's very concerning. The people inside the fence are maybe, for the most part, the good guys, but not necessarily the good guys. Alison Herman is here, Mel Woods is here, and we're here to talk about Season 2 and where Season 2 picks up on The Last of Us. And hello to both of you, Mel and Alison. Welcome to the show.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Hey, listen, I'm happy that you're both here. I got to give a heads up that we're going to spoil some things that happened in the first episode. I promise, not deep spoilers or anything, but we got to talk about some specific events. I'm excited about this, but maybe Alison, you can set up the table for us. Catch us up. For anyone who's not deep into The Last of Us, where did we leave off and where does this season pick up?
Sure. So the two central characters of The Last of Us are Joel, a middle-aged man who was a full adult and lost a daughter at the zombie outbreak when it happened, and Ellie, a teenager who is miraculously immune to the cordyceps infection that is ravaging the United States and the rest of the world in the world of the show. And at the conclusion of season 1, after smuggling Ellie across the country, Joel realizes that the medical procedure that the doctors he just delivered her to are administering is going to kill her in the name of a cure. And he snaps and kills basically everyone that he can find at that particular base. And I think the best way to synopsize season 2 without spoiling it is that season 2 is entirely about the fallout from that choice. Logistically, morally, what it means for Joel and Ellie, what it means for the people that they encountered at that showdown. And that's what unfolds over the 7 episodes of season 2.
Again, we're not going to get into too deep of spoilers, but I don't think it's too much of a spoiler to say Joel didn't tell Ellie this, didn't tell Ellie what happened at that base. So they left and she's like, oh, wow, I was saved from whatever was about to happen there, but she doesn't know the details of what was about to happen there. Mel, walk me through this. It's been 2 years since the show has been back. It's nice to have it back. How excited were you for the return of The Last of Us?
Yeah, I was not somebody who played the initial video game, but I was an avid consumer of media about the video game. I love to read a plot synopsis online, and it has been kind of quite heralded as a benchmark for queer representation. And so I've been very familiar with the narratives around the game. And so I was really excited about the first season of the show. And really, it hooked its arms into me. Those beautiful Alberta vistas, the central performances, the prestige of it all, the way it expanded upon the narratives of the game. I really, really enjoyed it. So I was quite looking forward to this and seeing how they take The Last of Us Part 2, the sequel game, which was even more heralded and championed and beloved by critics and fans alike, and turning it into TV in the same way they did with the first season. So I was hyped. I was hyped going in, and having watched the premiere, it didn't disappoint. I think it really hit those same emotional beats and narrative messiness that I was looking for.
In keeping with so much American television, you mentioned those beautiful Alberta vistas. You don't know that you are in Alberta in the first season of the show, but it is in fact shot in Alberta, and you get like some really stunning scenery. Like, do I have to go to Wyoming to see this? No, right here in this country. Okay, Mel, the drama is set in this, post-fungal outbreak that turns people into zombies. But really, like, the show is about this. The fundamental engine of it is a scarcity, pushes people to become monsters in a different way, and how far these characters will have to sort of resist becoming those monsters themselves, and how hard it is to escape that particular cycle. How are you feeling about this show landing in this political and cultural moment right now?
Yeah, the first season was a distinctly, the narrative of the game obviously came out before 2020, but the first season was developed in like 2020, 2021. It is a distinctly post-pandemic piece of media. There's ideas about like a large infection and people isolating themselves and tribalism and all of that was very familiar.
Yeah.
This second season arrives in this kind of political moment where in the last few months, we've entered a different kind of phase of nationalistic tribalism, us versus them mentalities that I think this kind of central conflict at the show and the fallout of the events that Alison was talking about really makes people kind of question their priorities, who they are, who the in-group is, who the out-group is. And I think we see that even in this very first episode. There's a scene, I think it was actually clipped in the trailer there, where Joel's talking with his sister-in-law, and he's saying, oh, we can't bring any more new people into our little safe zone. And she's like, well, you were a refugee once yourself, too.
Right.
And
the resolution
like,
of that scene,
seems...
that he's reminded that he, too, once knocked on those doors. And, he was he was an outsider then. I mean, the same question to you, Alison. Like, how is this show landing morally for you in this moment?
I think one of the interesting things about The Last of Us is, the show is about us. It's not really about the zombies. It's about the humans and how the events of the show affect human nature. And my understanding, I'm also not a game player, but my understanding of the themes of season 2 is that it has some that are inherited from the game that you get a hint of in the premiere, namely about revenge and morality and justice in that sense. But I think something the show really leans into by focusing on this community of Jackson, where Joel and Ellie have settled in the 5 years between seasons, is the idea of community. What do you owe to others versus what you owe to yourself? What do you owe to the people you consider part of your community versus people who are not part of your community yet or never have been? And I think that's a really interesting path that the show takes that it's interested in exploring this season.
Yeah, I'm very compelled at the arc that is set up. Also, if you've played any of the games, whether it's The Last of Us or Part 2, you know that the introduction of Abby in the very first scene of the very first episode of the season, you're like, oh, I know how this ends, and is not good for anyone involved. And so, like, being very particular about picking Abby as she's not quite a villain. You kind of go like, oh, this character has motivations. Like, she has very specific intentions about, what she's after here. So there's a lot going on there, but I can't spoil the video game for people because that would be a rude thing to do. Mel, for everyone who's tuning in to watch The Last of Us for those big themes, there's also a bunch of people who are like, I'm here for Pedro Pascal and I'm here for Bella Ramsey. Those people, first of all, America's sweethearts. Second of all, like, their press tour is like a delight to watch. But this season is set 5 years after that first season ended, and you get to see Bella Ramsey here step into Ellie as a role a little bit more. I want you to take a listen to this scene because this is where Joel jumps in to help Ellie as she's being hassled after kissing a girl.
Are you okay?
What is wrong with you? I don't need your fucking help.
Okay, what is going on with Ellie this time around? Tell me about Bella's performance of this, Mel.
Yeah, I mean, we've known that Bella Ramsey was a little firecracker, I think, since Game of Thrones, when they kind of made their first appearance as this tiny little Mormont. And the first season, they were really kind of still in that little, they're a kid. They're a traumatized kid. They're going through trauma as a kid, but they're this kid with this like kind of father figure. And, kids with father figures grow up. And we meet Ellie in this season as a 19-year-old who has obviously has some sort of conflict not yet revealed in this first episode with Joel, and the way that Bella brings it is this kind of steely, fiery, loose cannon but not loose cannon, traumatized but not traumatized. It's a very complicated performance. And they also are really, that scene that you just clipped from, they're really in their little butch era, which I do love to see on screen.
Yes.
And it's very steely. We got an arm tattoo, we've got big heavy flannels, we're carrying around a very large gun all the time.
We're hiding bite
there's
marks.
Something about that.
We're very moody around here, Yes.
It's a vibe. It's a vibe for anybody who is ever a 19-year-old queer teen, except you'd also have the trauma of an apocalypse carrying you around too. And I think that Bella brings that really well to the screen.
Alison, I would say that the conversation around Pedro Pascal, who's been a working actor for a long time, kind of changed with the first season of The Last of Us. Like I think that felt like a sort of an interesting turning point for him because, I don't think the conversation about him changed that much about during The Mandalorian, but it really felt like The Last of Us took it to a different place. Tell me about how he is in this role of Joel.
Well, The Mandalorian, who knows how often he was even on set. It's a great
he's got a mask on. We don't know. Yes, 100%.
But yeah, you're right. He broke out initially, I think, with Game of Thrones, where he's playing this very debonair, very sexy, impactful but small role. And I think in The Last of Us, it's the first time that because The Mandalorian is mostly a voice performance, you really get to see him inhabit a lead role. And I think this season you have seen him live with the aftermath of this fateful decision. And to your point earlier, it's not just that Ellie doesn't really know what happened in Salt Lake City where all of that went down, it's that he has actively lied to her.
Right.
And
he's keeping this from her. Yes.
Yeah, and the season pointedly opens by literally replaying the last scene from season 1 where he makes that decision to not come clean and not tell the truth. And I mean, I think it's not really a spoiler to say that we don't know the specifics of the tension between Joel and Ellie that has grown the last 5 years, but it has something to do with that. And also an addition that the show is making to the game is that Joel is currently in therapy with the wonderful Catherine O'Hara.
Catherine O'Hara appearance. Shout out Catherine. Yes, 100%. Yes.
But you just get to see him explore Joel's inner life through that disclosure a little more this season.
Here's where I want to close is I think there will be people listening who are used to Game of Thrones, who are used to The White Lotus, who are used to shows like that, anchoring the 9 p.m. on HBO slot, which is the biggest slot in all of television. And there's something about having to earn that slot and prove that you belong in that slot, and it's not easy to get that slot. Alison, what do you think the show's doing right to get the most prestigious spot in television?
I think as a video game adaptation, it is unusually character focused. I mean, we've just spent the last 5 minutes talking about Bella Ramsey and Pedro Pascal and those characters of Joel and Ellie. And I think that emphasis on character and narrative in the original game of The Last of Us made it a really ripe candidate for a prestige TV adaptation. And Neil Druckmann, the co-creator of the original game, and Craig Mazin, the co-creator of the show, who also did Chernobyl, I think have done a really good job leaning into the episodic character-focused nature of the story in a way that, I think in the years since The Last of Us has premiered, we've seen the video game adaptation go really mainstream. We've just had the Minecraft movie. There was Fallout. And I think those are understandably, the Minecraft movie is a funny kids movie.
Yeah.
Fallout had to kind of build out its world and characters a little more to make it work for TV. And I think The Last of Us was both ready-made for that treatment and has lived up to that potential in the 2 seasons we've had so far.
Yeah, I think, Mel, last word to you here, but what Alison's getting at is that, The Last of Us isn't like other video games. There's something unusually character-focused about that video game, even though you're still, navigating all those zombies, etc. What do you think it is about this adaptation that earns it the right to, the most prestigious spot on TV?
Yeah, it's like Alison says, the narrative, Minecraft movie, Mario movie, the Fallout, they're not focused on specific, there's characters from the game, but there's not this long arcing story. And I think The Last of Us works, whether they're zombies or not. There can be some other threat that is representing what the zombies represent. The zombies are not the most important part. It's this central relationship between these two characters and the story that they go on. And that makes for prime TV. And I think that much like Game of Thrones, we're going to watch over this season people who know what happens in the games and people who don't know what happens in the games get shocked and awed and spoiled and all of that. And that makes for great water cooler talk on Monday. And that's what that Sunday slot is all about, whether it's the virtual water cooler or the real one in the office.
I'll tell you this, if you don't know what happens in the video games with the introduction of this Abby character, you are in for a bad time. So please settle in, because this season, many twists and turns to come. But also, we know that The Last of Us has been greenlit for a 3rd season, so miles to go before we all sleep. Mel, Alison, I appreciate your time. Thanks again for being here.
Thanks so much
for having us.
Yes, of course. Alison Herman is a TV critic for Variety Magazine in LA, and Mel Woods is a senior editor at Extra Magazine in Vancouver. You can watch season 2 of The Last of Us on HBO and Crave. New episodes drop on Sundays at 9.
To find 1999 feels so low, feels like 99. Well, listen to me. 99, yeah, 99. 99, yeah, 99. 99, yeah, 99. Yeah, Mark Lee.
I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud, and this is Commotion. That is 1999. That is the lead single from the new album, The Firstfruit, by Mark Lee, who goes just by his first name, Mark. He's a Korean-Canadian K-pop star, and this album is his first solo record after debuting the group NCT 9 years ago. To talk about why fans have been excitedly waiting for Mark's solo album to drop, Lucy Ford is here. She's recently reviewed that album for NME. Lucy, welcome to the show.
Hi, such a pleasure to be here.
Listen, let's start with, there are people who don't need a starter pack from Mark. I get it. You know, he has 12.8 million followers on Instagram. But also, there are folks who do need a bit of introduction. Who is Mark Lee?
Okay, so like you said, he's hugely popular K-pop idol under SM Entertainment, which is one of the big K-pop labels. It sort of pioneered this idol training system, which is where sort of young teens will train for a number of years before being debuted in a group, sort of like an incubator system. So he auditioned in Vancouver at about age 12, 13. They do these sort of global auditions and then very quickly moved to Seoul, trained for a number of years, and then debuted in NCT, which is this sort of behemoth concept in K-pop. The idea is that it's one big group that initially was supposed to be ever expanding. And then in that group are sort of smaller subgroups made up of those members. It's sort of tapped out now at 25 members.
I say that's big enough, I think, I imagine, you know?
Yeah, it kind of was supposed to go on forever, but I think they thought 25 was enough. But Mark is one of, I think people would call like one of the founding members of NCT. He was in the debut song of NCT as a whole, but also one of its main subgroups, which is NCT Dream, which he's a member of. And to me, I think he's the backbone of NCT. I don't think NCT exists without Mark Lee. And he, as well as being in NCT Dream, is also in a group called NCT 127. So he kind of has this fan design moniker of like the hardest working K-pop idol in the business, just because he is split everywhere.
But I was gonna say, like, I want to hold on that for just a moment, real quick here. And just how unusual is it for one K-pop idol to be a part of so many different groups? Because that doesn't sound that usual to me.
Yeah, it's pretty unusual. You will often find like in a main group, there will be sort of subunits, like maybe 2 or 3 members will go off and do their own thing and make an album, but they won't be a real separate group. The thing about Mark is that he is in, with NCT Dream and NCT 127 especially, he's in 2 full-time groups that have their own promotion schedules. You know, he'll go on tour with one, have like a day off, and then go on tour with the other group.
Oh
so
my God.
I'm hard pressed to find another idol that is doing it to that extent.
One, I'm exhausted just hearing that. But 2, I think like what's interesting is like he does all of the things. Like he sings, he raps, he dances, and like that's not necessarily the case with a lot of different members. Usually they got like 1 or the 2 of them, but he sort of fills all those roles. You mentioned that Mark is being known for being a rapper. In an interview with host Eric Nam on Debak show for a few years ago, Mark talked about how he felt about being seen this way.
You know what? For my SM auditions, they were like, "Okay, we've heard enough of your singing. Can you rap?" And I'm like, "Nah, nah."
But here you are.
Here I am.
You're the rapper.
I'm the rapper.
You're the rapper.
You know, but I've never, like, if you go on Google or Wikipedia, it's like Mark Lee, Canadian rapper. That gives me chills, yo. Like, I've never considered myself. I would never label myself as a rapper.
Lucy, what's your reaction to hearing that? Him being like, I would never call myself a rapper.
It's just so funny. I mean, I feel like I saw your reaction there. Like, he's just such an endearing character.
Yeah.
The fact is, like, he is a rapper. He raps in almost every song that he's in all of these groups. I guess in K-pop, you're sort of given like an assigned position. And I imagine with Mark, the thing is that because he's a native English speaker, the Jennie from the group Blackpink, also in an interview with Dua Lipa a few years ago, she said basically that when she auditioned to be in Blackpink, she wanted to be a singer. But because she's an English speaker, she grew up in New Zealand, they were like, well, you're going to be the rapper, because of course, like someone who has a sort of like command of the language is going to have the more tricky rhythm to it, right?
Right.
So it makes sense that Mark kind of was made the rapper because a lot of these raps are in English. That's the part of the K-pop song that's usually in English. So he's really good at it, though. I mean, I understand why maybe on sort of like a macro level, he doesn't want to be known as a rapper just with all of the sort of cultural stuff that comes with that. But in K-pop, I think he's great.
Well, and also
yeah.
the idea that like he wouldn't call himself a rapper, like that's why they're like, well, no, sir, like we have a lot of records of you rapping here. So I want to turn to the albums because Mark's new solo album is called The Firstfruit. It's very autobiographical. There are songs inspired by every city he's lived in. That includes Toronto, where he was born, Vancouver, where he grew up. He was involved in the writing of every song on this album for a debut solo K-pop record. How unusual is that?
It's pretty unusual, especially for SM Entertainment, which is, again, the label he's under. There are a few K-pop groups that are kind of known for being self-producing. BTS, Stray Kids, 17, there are ones you might have heard of, but very few SM groups or artists are. And I think it's just because they're a little bit more controlled. Just SM has a sound that it sticks to. So for Mark to have so much creative freedom is really interesting. I think it speaks to maybe the pull he has in SM just by virtue of being the backbone of multiple groups, you know, being across them. I imagine it was a conversation that was had that like, I will do all these things if I'm able to have such creative freedom when it comes to finally being a solo artist. You know, he debuted 9 years ago. He's only 25.
He's been at this for a long time. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. Like I think I have described this album as sort of like a magnum opus, which is a bizarre thing to say
25.
for someone who is 25. Yeah. And it's an incredibly nostalgic album. It's so autobiographical. Again, crazy to say as someone who's 25 to be like nostalgic about their life, but he's packed a lot in that time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The idea of your magnum opus arriving at 25 is a wild and kind of stunning thought. I want to play another song off the album. This one is called Righteous.
Represent one time for the main event. Oh God, there's a Donald break. Right. Yeah, two bands I represent, but I serve only one God. Hold up, one thing for sure, be a man of God.
First of all, Lucy, clearly rapping. Let's not lie. Second of all, you said this is your favorite track off the album. Why is this one your favorite?
I think this is kind of like my favorite variant of Mark Lee. Like I said, he does a lot. But I love Mark Lee when he's being sort of propulsive, when there's a real fight to his energy. I think it is a cathartic song to listen to, and it also feels like probably a cathartic song to perform.
Yeah.
And it like sonically is very similar to NCT 127, which is probably the NCT unit that I personally like the most, like as a sound. But I think the reason I like it so much and what I gravitated towards with it when I first heard it is it really encapsulates the ethos of the album really succinctly. The album is about his faith, his parents, and just how confident he is. And really, that's all in this song. Like every lyric is just about those three things. And it's just very neatly packaged. Like the thesis statement is there.
That's I think like when you have that many forces gathering in one song, it kind of sticks out in that way. I got about a minute left here, but you've been covering K-pop for a while. When you look at Mark's new solo album, in the context of his general career as a K-pop idol, someone who's been a member of all these different groups, what's the thing that you're thinking about here? What's your takeaway?
I think what I've always been so interested in K-pop is just the way that it tries to strike a balance. And what I mean by that is ultimately, it's a huge experiment in capitalism. It is constantly trying to find ways to make money out of fans, but also it has a product that people need to be emotionally invested in and have some level of authenticity to it, right? So balancing that is really difficult. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And so with Mark, he's a really good litmus test of like how much you can make someone a workforce before people start like demanding a union for him, you know? And so I think with him, like we've been waiting to see when he's not being splintered across all these groups, sort of forced to be doing different sounds. Like what does he want to do? What is he? Who is he? What is him as a whole complete being? Yeah. And I think this album is just like really successful in doing that, probably because he had so much creative freedom, but he clearly has been thinking about it for a long time.
Lucy, I got to leave it there, but I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you.
Yes, of
so
course. Lucy Ford is a culture writer. She's in London, UK. Mark's debut album, The Firstfruit, is out now. My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This show is called Commotion. We'll be back tomorrow. See you then.